Olivia pressed her thumb into the base of the little boy's foot and watched his toes spread. He was 4 years old, post-surgery, and he'd been told that walking would hurt. She'd been told the same thing about moving to Denton, Texas 8 years ago, and she'd done it anyway. "Again," she said, and the boy's mother reached over and squeezed his knee. He pushed against Olivia's hand. His face went tight, then released. She nodded once. "Good, that's the one." She marked the chart, capped the pen, and handed the session summary across the low table. The mother took it without reading it, too busy watching her son rotate his ankle in slow, deliberate circles. Olivia let her watch. That moment, the first time a parent stopped holding their breath, was the part nobody trained you for. You just learned to give them the space to have it. She walked the family to the front of the clinic, past 2 waiting children who both looked up when she came through the door, and stopped at the front desk long enough to confirm tomorrow's first appointment. Her schedule was full. It had been full for almost 2 years now, which still surprised her, though she kept that to herself. 3 years ago, it had been empty. Not slow. Empty. A new practice in a city she hadn't grown up in, with 0 referrals and 0 local reputation, and a waiting room with 4 chairs that she'd bought secondhand and carried up a flight of stairs herself because the elevator was broken. She'd built it. 1 patient family at a time, 1 referral letter at a time, 1 pediatric neurology department that finally agreed to meet with her after 4 attempts. The clinic she'd left behind in Chicago had been good. It had taken her 5 years to build that one too. Then Derek got the site supervisor offer in Denton, and the math was what the math was. 2 careers, 1 city, she'd picked his. She didn't announce that. She'd just done it. Her last patient of the day was a 7-year-old girl with cerebral palsy who arrived with her grandmother and a bag of corn chips she refused to surrender. Olivia didn't ask her to. They worked for 50 minutes, and at the end, the girl demonstrated a lateral step sequence she hadn't been able to complete 2 weeks ago. The grandmother stood up from her chair without meaning to. The corn chips hit the floor. "She did it," the grandmother said. "She did it last Tuesday, too," Olivia said. "She's been holding out on you." The girl grinned and picked up her chips. Olivia locked up at 6:15, drove the 12 minutes home, and pulled into the driveway behind Derek's truck. The front light was already on. Through the kitchen window, she could see him at the stove. She sat in the car for a moment, not because anything was wrong, but because the day had been full and the car was quiet. She rolled her neck once, picked up her bag, and went inside. The kitchen smelled like garlic and something browning in butter. Derek was at the stove with a dish towel tucked into his belt, which he always did, and which always made him look like someone's dad in the best possible way. He was a big man, broad through the shoulders, with the kind of hands that were always marked with something. Concrete dust, caulk, a scar across the left palm from a framing nail 2 years back that he'd handled by wrapping it in a shop rag and finishing the afternoon. He'd told her about it that night at dinner, casual, already closed. "Pork chops," he said, without turning around. "I can smell that." "How is the kid with the foot?" "Better." She set her bag on the bench by the door and washed her hands at the kitchen sink, standing beside him. He pushed back today. Real push. Derek smiled at the pan. "Good kid." That was the thing about Derek. He remembered the kids. Not the diagnoses, not the terminology. The kids. He'd remember the foot kid next week and ask. He'd remembered the girl with the corn chips since the first appointment, called her the corn chip kid in the shorthand they used at home, and always asked how she was doing with that particular expression that meant he actually wanted to know. Olivia dried her hands and checked her phone. 1 message from her mother. Got the results from Dr. Hale. All clear. Thank you for the ride yesterday, Bug. Don't let me forget, I owe you a pie. She texted back a single pie emoji and set the phone face down on the counter. Getting her mother to Denton had been a project that started the same month the clinic opened, because those were the two things she decided she was not going to put off. Her mother had been a widow for 3 years by then and was still living in the same house outside Chicago in a suburb that was getting expensive and cold in ways that weren't only meteorological. Olivia had spent 4 months researching neighborhoods, driven down twice to walk streets and look at houses, and found a one-story rancher 6 minutes from the new clinic that backed up to a quiet cul-de-sac and had a grab bar already installed in the master bath. She'd furnished it mostly herself, with Derek's help on the heavy pieces, over a single long weekend. For the first year, she'd driven her mother to every doctor's appointment, every cardiology follow-up, every lab draw, because her mother didn't yet trust the local roads and wouldn't say so directly, but would hesitate at the car door in a way that made it clear. Olivia had driven her. Every time, rescheduled her own patients twice to make it work, and told her mother it was no trouble, because to her, it wasn't. Her mother was here. That was the outcome. The driving was just driving. Now her mother was 6 minutes away and texting about pie, which was the best possible version of that whole complicated year. Derek plated the pork chops and set them on the table, moved the pan to the back burner, and pulled 2 beers from the refrigerator without asking if she wanted one, because he already knew. He set hers down in front of her chair and sat across the table and picked up his fork. "Your mom okay?" he said. "Clear on the echo." "Good." He cut into his pork chop, cut into his pork. "She mentioned the gutters? I told her I'd come by this weekend." "She didn't." "I'll text her." He would. He'd been doing things like that since they arrived in Denton, stopping by her mother's house on Saturday mornings, fixing the things her mother cataloged but didn't ask about directly, the way older women sometimes didn't ask directly. The porch step that had gone soft, the kitchen faucet that ran long after you let go. He showed up with tools and left with an empty coffee cup, and her mother called him a good man in that specific tone she reserved for facts she considered settled. Olivia ate and listened to Derek talk about a concrete pour that had gone sideways in the afternoon heat, some calculation that the crew had gotten wrong and that he'd caught in time. He wasn't complaining. He was narrating. There was a difference with him, always had been. He talked about work the way she talked about her patients, with attention, without drama. Outside, the neighborhood was going quiet the way it did after 7. A sprinkler ran somewhere down the block. A car passed. The light in the kitchen was the warm, low kind that happened when the days got shorter in October. Olivia reached across and took one of his fries without asking, and he pushed the plate an inch in her direction, without looking up. They had built this. It hadn't been given to them. The city had been his, and she'd come here anyway, and she'd worked until it was hers too, until she had patients who asked for her by name and a mother 6 minutes away, and a kitchen that smelled like dinner at 6:30 on a Tuesday. Derek was talking about the concrete pour again, something about the foreman's call that he disagreed with, but hadn't overridden, and Olivia was listening, and the beer was cold, and the sprinkler ran its slow arc down the block, and none of it, not one ordinary piece of it, gave her any reason to look up. Derek set 2 plates on the table without being asked. That was normal. That was Derek. The kind of man who tracked dinner the way he tracked a pour schedule on a foundation job, like timing was something you owed people. Olivia dropped her bag by the door and washed her hands at the kitchen sink, watching him arrange the plates the way he always did. The pork chop at the 10 o'clock position, a handful of fries in the lower right corner, a small ramekin of ketchup that she didn't need, but that always appeared anyway. "Good day?" he said. "Really good, actually." She dried her hands on the dish towel. Sophia did the lateral sequence all the way to the mat table. Derek looked up from the stove. The girl with the... He touched his own leg, not to point at anything specific, just to mark the location of what he remembered. Yeah. Olivia pulled out her chair. Her grandmother cried. Good cry? The best kind. He brought his own plate over and sat down across from her, and for a minute, neither of them said anything. Outside, a truck passed on the street, and the kitchen light did what it always did at this hour, turned everything slightly amber, slightly warmer than the actual temperature of the room. Olivia reached across and took one of his fries. Derek watched her do it the way he always watched her do it, with his face arranged in the practiced patience of a man who had accepted this outcome years ago and made his peace. You have your own fries, he said. Mine are over there. He didn't say anything else. He ate. She was almost through her pork chop when she noticed the phone. It was face down on the counter. That was unremarkable by itself. Derek put his phone face down sometimes when he was eating, and she had never thought twice about it, because neither of them was the type to scroll through dinner. And it was one of the things she had always quietly appreciated about him, the way he treated the table like a room with its own rules. But the phone was not near the charging cable where it usually sat. It was in the middle of the counter, just slightly past the edge of the cutting board, and the placement of it had the particular randomness of something set down quickly, without thought, in the middle of something else. Olivia looked at it for a moment. Then she looked back at her plate. Her mother had called that morning from the cardiologist's office, standing in the parking lot. Her voice stretched thin and bright the way it got when relief hit, before she had time to compose it. Dr. Hale said, everything looks exactly right. Olivia had been between patients, holding the phone with one hand and a chart with the other. And she remembered saying, I told you, Mom. I told you it would be fine. And meaning it. She had rescheduled 2 families to drive her mother to that first appointment 8 months ago. She had sat in the waiting room with a hospital-issue cup of bad coffee and made herself grade nothing, answer no emails, just sit. Now the results were clean, and her mother's voice in the parking lot had been the voice of a woman who had been afraid for a long time, and was now, briefly, not. It had been a good day on 2 different counts. My mom called, she said. Derek looked up. What did Hale say? Clear. She took another fry. Everything looks exactly right, is what she said. Derek nodded slowly. Something crossed his face. She read it as relief, the same relief she had felt in the space between patients, and she filed it under the same category as his Saturday morning trips to her mother's house with a caulking gun and a level under the general heading of Derek, who shows up. He had regrouted the bathroom tile. He had replaced the screen door that stuck in August. He knew which drawer in Lorraine's kitchen stuck and how to pull it at the slight upward angle that made it open clean. Good, he said. That's really good. He picked up his fork again. Olivia watched him for a half-second longer than she needed to. There was something in the way he had said it. Not the words, which were the right words, but the pace of the sentence, the way the second good arrived a beat too carefully, like someone stepping over something on a floor they knew well. She decided it was emotion he didn't know how to show. Derek had always been like that with her mother, invested in a way that sometimes surprised her, and the news being good would hit him the same way it hit her, as a weight that had been there long enough to stop feeling like a weight, lifting all at once. She speared the last piece of pork chop. When she stood to bring her plate to the sink, she passed the counter, and she was close enough to the phone to see, in the fraction of a second before she looked away, that the screen had not gone dark. Most phones darkened after a minute. This one was lit. Someone had texted him in the last 60 seconds. He hadn't moved to check it. Olivia set her plate in the sink and ran the water. Behind her, Derek collected his own plate, and she heard the familiar sound of him scraping the ramekin clean over the trash can. a small and ordinary sound that had been part of her evenings for 8 years. She didn't turn around. "I'll clean up," she said. "You sure? Go rest." He set his plate in the sink beside hers, close enough that their edges touched, and he put one hand briefly on her shoulder, just for a second, the weight of it familiar and solid and warm. And then he walked out of the kitchen, and a moment later she heard the soft click of the bedroom door. The phone was still on the counter. She dried her hands and didn't look at it. Cassie called at 10:47 p.m. Olivia was in the break room at the clinic, eating a protein bar over the sink and listening to the last of the rain hit the roof. She'd taken the late shift covering for Marcus, who had a sick kid at home. The lights in the back half of the building were off. The whole place had that hollow, after-hours quiet she usually didn't mind. She picked up on the second ring. "Hey," she said, "aren't you supposed to be asleep?" "Where's Derek tonight?" Cassie asked. Olivia set the protein bar down. Her sister's voice had a quality she didn't recognize, not panic, not excitement. Something stripped of all of that. "Home," Olivia said. "Why?" A pause. 3 seconds. Maybe 4. "Liv, I'm sitting outside Mom's house." Olivia didn't say anything. "Derek's truck is in the driveway," Cassie said. "It's almost 11 o'clock. The rain was still going. Olivia watched a drop slide down the break room window and disappear into the frame. "Maybe something broke," she said. "Maybe she called him about the Liv. The kitchen drawer or the Liv, stop." Cassie's voice didn't rise. It just landed. "I'm looking at them right now through the front window. The curtain isn't all the way closed." Olivia put one hand flat on the counter. "Send me what you're seeing," she said. "I already took it. I didn't want to, but send it." The photo came through 11 seconds later. Olivia opened it. The image was taken through a gap in the curtains, slightly angled, the kind of shot you take when your hands aren't steady, but you make yourself hold still. The living room lamp was on, the standing lamp in the corner, the one Olivia had helped her mother carry in from the car 18 months ago. The light was warm and low, the way her mother kept it in the evenings. Derek was on the couch, not sitting upright the way a man sits when he's there to fix something or make polite conversation. He was settled, legs relaxed, one arm stretched along the back cushions. His boots were off. Olivia could see his socked feet at the edge of the frame. Her mother was beside him. Lorraine's head was on his shoulder. Not leaned over, not a quick gesture. Rested there, the full weight of it, the way a person rests against someone they've been resting against for a long time. Derek's hand was in her hair, not on her shoulder, not on her arm. His fingers were at the back of her head, slow and deliberate, the way you touch someone when you know exactly what they want. Lorraine's hand was on his chest. Her eyes were closed. Olivia looked at the photo for a long time. She didn't move away from the counter. She didn't drop her phone. The protein bar was still sitting on the edge of the sink where she'd put it down. She picked it up. She finished it. She folded the wrapper in half and put it in the trash. "Liv!" Cassie's voice, still on the line. "I see it," Olivia said. "Tell me what you want me to do." "Go back to my house. Use the spare key in the planter. Don't say anything to either of them." "Olivia, can you do that?" A long pause. "Yes." "Okay," Olivia said. "I'll be home in 40 minutes. She hung up. She stood in the break room for a moment, looking at the window. The rain had eased. There was just the sound of water moving somewhere in the drain outside, doing what it was going to do regardless. She saved the photo. Then she turned off the break room light, walked back to her last patient's room, and finished documenting the session notes she hadn't completed yet. Mia Torres, 7 years old. Cerebral palsy, arrived with her grandmother. Lateral step sequence completed to the mat table. Grandmother present. Patient tolerated session, well. She typed every word of it, spelled all of it correctly. She shut down the computer. She collected her jacket from the hook by the door. She pulled it on and zipped it to the collar, because the rain had brought a cold front with it and the parking lot would be damp. She locked the clinic. She sat in her car for 4 minutes without starting it. The photo was on her phone in her jacket pocket. She didn't need to look at it again. The image had already settled somewhere behind her eyes, and she understood it would not move from there. Her mother's head on his shoulder, his hand in her hair. The boots lined up neatly beside the couch, the way you line your boots up when you plan to stay. 8 years. She had given this town 8 years. She had packed her practice in Chicago into boxes and driven 14 hours and built something from an empty clinic, from referral lists and cold calls and rescheduled Saturdays. And she had done it without complaint, because he had asked her to, and she had said yes. She had driven her mother to every appointment. She had sat in the cardiology waiting room twice, brought coffee, rearranged her schedule. She had moved her mother to a house 6 minutes away so she wouldn't be alone. And they had taken that proximity, that exact closeness she had made possible, and used it like it belonged to them. She started the car. She drove home the long way, 12 minutes, and she did not turn on the radio. When she pulled onto her street, she could see the light in the bedroom window. Derek was home. Of course he was home. He would be in bed, phone on the nightstand, one arm behind his head the way he slept. She pulled into the driveway. Cassie's rental was parked at the curb. Olivia sat for a moment looking at it. Her sister had driven out here for the weekend to see her. Had come with a bottle of wine and a bag of those crackers Olivia liked. Had been sitting on Olivia's couch less than 3 hours ago, laughing about something. Olivia picked up her bag. She went inside. The lights in the living room were off. She could hear Cassie in the guest room, the quiet sounds of someone awake and waiting and not knowing what to do with their hands. Olivia walked past the guest room door and stood outside it for a moment. "Go to sleep," she said, just loud enough. A beat of silence. "Okay," Cassie said. Olivia walked to the kitchen. She drank a full glass of water, standing at the sink. She set the glass down carefully on the counter, right side up. Then she walked to the bedroom and opened the door without making any noise. Derek was asleep, or appeared to be. His breathing was even, his arm behind his head, exactly as she'd known he'd be. The room was dark, except for the streetlight coming in at the edge of the curtain. She stood in the doorway and looked at him for a long time. She thought about her mother's eyes, closed, resting on someone else's shoulder in the house Olivia had helped her find. She thought about the phone face down on the kitchen counter. The charged silence. His hand on her shoulder, the way you touch someone when you're managing them. She changed her clothes in the bathroom with the door closed. She came back. She got into bed. She did not sleep. By the time the room started to go gray at the edges, she knew exactly what she was going to do. She hadn't planned it the way you plan something. It had simply arrived, clear and complete, the way a diagnosis does when all the evidence finally lines up and there's only one thing left that it could be. She lay still and waited for his alarm to go off. Dawn came up gray over the back fence, and Olivia was already dressed. She had made the decision somewhere around 3 a.m, lying on her side of the bed, with Derek's breathing steady behind her, and the decision had not announced itself with anger. It arrived the way a fever breaks. 1 minute, the body is fighting something. The next minute, it is just tired and clear and done. She watched the ceiling go from black to charcoal to the dull pewter of a Texas morning, and she knew exactly what she was going to do and the order she was going to do it in. Derek rolled over and reached for her without opening his eyes. His hand found her hip. The scar on his palm dragged against the fabric of her shirt, that ridge of healed skin from the framing nail 2 years back, the one she used to kiss without thinking. She did not move. She let his hand rest there for 4 seconds, and then she got out of bed. "You're up early," he said, voice thick. "Patient at 7. It wasn't true. She had nothing until 10. The lie came out flat and easy, and that frightened her more than anything else that morning. How smooth it was. How little it cost. She made coffee for both of them. She poured his into the travel mug he liked and set it by his keys. Her hands did not shake. She had expected them to shake, and they did not, and she stood at the counter watching her own steady fingers screw the lid on and understood that the shaking had already happened. Weeks ago, in places she hadn't let herself look. Cassie was awake on the couch, sitting up with the blanket pulled at her waist, holding her phone like it might bite her. She had her mother's chin and their father's eyes, and right now both of those things were wrecked. "Did you sleep?" Olivia said. "No." Cassie's voice cracked on the single syllable. "Liv, I keep seeing it. His hand in her." She stopped. She put the phone face down on the cushion as though that would help. "How long has she had him over there? How many Saturdays?" "Don't." Olivia crouched in front of her sister and took both of her hands. They were cold. "Not yet. I need you with me, not in pieces." "What do we do?" "We talk to her first, just us, today, while he's on site." Cassie's face contorted. "Not him? Him later." Olivia held her sister's hands tighter. "She broke something that belonged to all three of us. She doesn't get to hear it from him first. She doesn't get a warning to build her story. We go to her with our eyes open, and we make her look at us." Cassie nodded the way people nod when they don't agree, but they trust you anyway. That trust was a weight Olivia would carry all day. She had spent 8 years learning to lean on Derek, and one night had taught her she had been leaning on air. Cassie was not air. Cassie had driven 4 hours in the dark on a hunch and parked outside their mother's house at 11 at night because something felt wrong, and she had been right, and now Olivia was going to ask her to walk into the worst conversation of their lives and not flinch. "Okay," Cassie whispered. "Okay." Author Mother's Rancher sat 6 minutes from the clinic, on a street of identical houses with identical crepe myrtles, and Olivia had driven this route 100 times. To doctors, to the pharmacy, to the cardiologist 8 months running, while Lorraine gripped the door handle and stared straight ahead and said she was fine. She was fine, she was just nervous. And Olivia had reached over at every red light and squeezed her mother's knee. She thought about that now, pulling into the driveway behind Cassie's rental at 2 in the afternoon. Every one of those squeezes, every appointment she'd rescheduled patients for. She had moved this woman across the country so she wouldn't be alone, and the woman had not been alone. The woman had had Olivia's husband. Lorraine opened the door in her gardening clothes, a smudge of potting soil on her cheek, and her face lit up the way it always did. And that was the part Olivia could not forgive even later. The genuine joy. "Both my girls. What a treat." "I just put on—" "We need to talk to you, Mom," Olivia said. Something in her tone landed. Lorraine's smile held, but her eyes flickered, and she stepped back to let them in, and the house smelled like the candle she always burned, and the coffee she always had going, and underneath it, faintly like a man's deodorant that was not her father's. They sat in the living room. The couch. That couch. Olivia did not sit on it. She took the armchair across from it, and Cassie stood by the window with her arms crossed, and Lorraine lowered herself onto the cushions where the photograph had been taken 16 hours earlier, and looked from one daughter to the other with the bright, nervous attention of a woman who knows. "Cassie was here last night," Olivia said, "around 11. The color went out of Lorraine's face in a single smooth motion, top to bottom, like a shade being drawn. "Mom," Cassie's voice was shaking, "I saw you. I don't know what you think you—" "Don't." Olivia said it quietly, and it cut the room in half. "Don't do that. I have known you my whole life. I watched you bury Dad. I held your hand at every appointment for 8 months. Do not sit there and make me say the word. You know exactly what we saw." Lorraine's hands came up to her mouth. Her eyes filled. And the thing that broke in Olivia's chest right then was not the betrayal. It was the shame on her mother's face, because shame meant it was true. Shame meant there was nothing left to argue. "It wasn't." Lorraine started and stopped, and her chin trembled. "I was lonely. You don't know what it is. Your father gone, this town, nobody, and he was kind to me, Olivia. He came around and he was kind, and he's my husband." The words hung there. Lorraine closed her eyes, and the tears slid down through the potting soil on her cheek, and she did not deny it again. That was the moment it became real for all three of them at once. Cassie made a sound at the window like something tearing. "How long?" Cassie said. Lorraine shook her head. "How long, Mom?" "Since the spring." Barely a whisper. "Since around the spring." The spring. Olivia did the math without wanting to. The spring was when her mother had cried over the clear echocardiogram, had called from the cardiologist's office shaking with relief. The spring was 8 months of Saturdays. The spring was Derek saying good. "That's really good," in a voice that had seemed slightly off. And now she knew why. Now she knew the off note in it. It had been guilt sitting in his throat like a fishbone. Olivia stood up. "I'm not going to scream at you. I want you to understand that. I'm not going to give you a single thing you can use later to tell yourself I was hysterical, or unfair, or that I drove him to it." She walked to the door. "I'm going to tell the people who need to know. And then, you and I are done. You won't see me. You won't see Cassie." She looked at her sister, who nodded, white-faced and certain. "You did this with your eyes open. You can live in what it costs. Olivia, please, you're my daughter. You're his too, apparently," Cassie said, and walked out. She went to Derek's parents that evening, while Derek was still at the site, because she wanted them to hear it from her before they heard it from anyone, and because she knew them, and she knew that of all the people in this, Ray and Donna Hatcher were the ones who could decide the whole thing. Ray Hatcher had built half of this town with his hands, and Donna had taught Sunday school for 30 years, and they had welcomed Olivia like a daughter the day Derek brought her home. They had stood up at the wedding. Donna kept a photo of Olivia and Derek on the mantle, between the high school football pictures and the baptism candles. These were people who believed in family the way some people believe in God, structurally, as the thing that holds the roof up. She sat at their kitchen table, the same table where she'd eaten 1,000 Sunday dinners, and she told them plainly, no tears, no embellishment, their son, her mother, since the spring. Donna's hand went to her throat. Ray's face went very still. And then Ray said the thing she had been afraid someone would say. "Now, hold on." He set his palms flat on the table. "Olivia, honey, this is a serious thing to say about a man, about my son. You sure about what you saw? Could be your mother's lonely, and Derek's he's a helper, you know that. He does for everybody. He fixes her drawers and her screen doors." "Ray," Donna said, "I'm just saying, we don't fly off the handle. A picture through a window at night, that can be anything. People grieve different. Your mama lost your daddy. Maybe she leaned on him in a weak minute, and Derek didn't know how to." He spread his hands. "I've known that boy his whole life. He's not that. This is private family business, and I don't think we ought to be—" For one full second, the floor tilted under Olivia. She watched Ray Hatcher rearranging the facts into a shape he could live with, watched a man reaching for the version of his son he needed to be true, and she understood that if Ray decided to believe it, Donna would follow, and the church would follow, and the whole town would look at her sideways for the rest of her life as the woman who blew up a family over a misunderstanding. The fabric was closing. She could feel it closing. And then she reached into her purse and took out her phone and slid it across the table to Donna. Not Ray, to Donna. "I came to you 2 weeks ago," she said quietly to Ray. "Donna. I came to you about your back, remember? About the exercises for your back? And I left my phone on your counter, and you saw the messages, and you came to me in the church parking lot, and you held my hand and you said, 'I'm so sorry, baby. I already knew something was wrong with him.' You said that. You knew before I did." The kitchen went silent. Ray turned to his wife. Donna. Donna Hatcher had not moved. Her eyes were on the table. And then she nodded. One small, terrible nod, and the tears came down her face, the way they had come down Lorraine's, except these were a mother's tears for a son she could no longer pretend about. "I saw the messages, Ray." Her voice was barely there. 2 weeks ago, I told Olivia I'd give her time. She pressed a napkin to her mouth. "I've been sick over it. I didn't know how to tell you. I kept hoping it wasn't, but it was. It is." He called her sweetheart. Our boy called Lorraine sweetheart in writing and made plans for Saturday, and I read every word. She looked up at her husband, and her face was a ruin. "It's not a misunderstanding. I wish to God it was." Ray sat back in his chair. The denial drained out of him all at once and left something older and heavier behind. He looked at his wife, and then at Olivia, and then at his own hands, those builder's hands, and he said, very low, "Then it's not private. Then it's a thing he did." That was the moment the fabric did not close. Olivia had reached into it weeks earlier on a hunch she could barely name and left her phone on a counter. And that one quiet decision was now the only reason she was not going to spend the rest of her life as the town's bitter ex-wife. She had not gotten lucky. She had simply known, the way she'd known about her mother, the way some part of her had known for months and protected itself by being ready. "Thank you for telling us," Ray said finally. "However you found out. Thank you." He put his hand over Donna's on the table. "He's not eating at this table, not until—" He stopped. He didn't finish it, because there was no end to that sentence that included Derek coming back. Derek knew something was wrong before he knew anything at all. It started small, the way these things do. He came home Thursday, and his mother's casserole dish wasn't on the porch where she dropped one off every week, and he didn't think much of it. He texted his dad about borrowing the post hole digger for the weekend, and the message sat there, delivered, unanswered, all day, and Ray always answered. Ray answered fast, and by evening Derek was checking the phone more than he meant to. Sunday came. Sunday was the Hatcher dinner, had been every week for 30 years, and Derek showed up at 1 o'clock with a 6-pack of his dad's beer like always, and the driveway was full of cars, and he walked in the side door into the kitchen, and the talking stopped. Not all at once, like a door slamming. Worse than that, it died down in pieces. His sister was at the counter, and she looked at him and then looked at the floor. His cousin half raised a hand and then didn't. His mother was at the stove, and she did not turn around. The smell of pot roast and the football game muttering in the next room, and 9 people who had known him his whole life, arranging themselves so they would not have to meet his eyes. "Hey," Derek said, "y'all start without me?" His father came in from the living room and looked at him. Just looked, the way you'd look at a man you'd never met, who'd walked into your house by mistake. Ray Hatcher looked at his only son like he was looking through glass at something on the other side, and he did not say a word, and he turned around and walked back to his chair. Derek set the beer on the counter. His hand wasn't quite steady. "Dad?" Nobody passed him a plate. There were 8 places set at the table, and he counted them twice, and there was no 9th. And his mother finally turned from the stove, with her eyes red and swollen, and she said, "I think you should go home, Derek. What's going on?" His voice cracked up high, a boy's voice in a big man's body. "Somebody tell me what's—" "You know what's going on, son." His father not turning around. "You knew before any of us. You just thought we wouldn't." The blood left Derek's face. Olivia watched it happen from where she stood in the doorway, between the kitchen and the dining room, and she had promised herself she would feel triumph, and she did not. She felt the floor she had cleared. The terrible quiet of a job done right. He turned and saw her there, and his whole body jerked and his mouth opened, and she watched him reach for the explanation, the version, the story he'd been carrying ready in his chest. And she watched him understand in real time that there was no one in this room to tell it to. That they had all already heard, that his mother had known for 2 weeks and said nothing while he sat at this table laughing. That last Sunday's dinner, where they'd ribbed him about the Cowboys and his aunt had hugged him goodbye, had not been a normal Sunday. It had been the last one. They'd all been deciding how to do this while he ate their food. Olivia. Her name came out of him broken. "Olivia, please, we can talk, just you and me. Let me explain it, it didn't mean—" She said nothing. That was the cruelty, and she let it be cruel. She had screamed at him in her head for a week, and she did not give him a single decibel of it now, because her silence was the only thing left that he could not argue with, could not reshape, could not turn into her being unreasonable. He stood in his parents' kitchen, and the silence pressed in from every direction, and there was nobody, not one person, who would break it for him. He pulled out his phone. She knew exactly who he was calling. His best friend, the guy from the site, the one who'd been his groomsman. The phone rang and rang in the dead quiet kitchen on speaker because his hand was shaking too hard to hold it to his ear, and it went to voicemail, and Derek's face did the thing she'd been waiting for without wanting to wait for it. He called a second number. Voicemail. A third. The phone just ringing into nothing, into the new shape of his life, and every unanswered ring landed on him like a stone, and his big shoulders came down, and he understood. He understood that she had not just told these people. She had gotten to them first. That every warm word, every wave from a truck, every hey man in the last 2 weeks had been people who already knew, being decent until they could stop, that the world he assumed was his, the town he'd brought her to, the family that was supposed to be his birthright and her borrowed home, had quietly turned around him while he slept beside her, and that when he reached out his hand now, every single one of them had already let go. "Go home, Derek," his mother said again, and her voice broke clean in two on his name. He looked at Olivia one more time. She held his gaze and gave him nothing, absolutely nothing, the way you hold steady for a child who is about to fall so they don't see you flinch. Then she stepped back out of the doorway so he had a clear path to the door. And he took it because there was nowhere else in that house left for him to stand. Olivia signed the lease on a Wednesday. The apartment was on the second floor of a building near the clinic, 12 minutes by car, 4 minutes if she walked fast, which she usually did. 2 bedrooms, one she'd use for work, hardwood floors with a scratch near the kitchen doorway that she noticed immediately and decided she didn't mind. She carried her own boxes. Cassie had offered to stay another week, and Olivia had told her no. Meaning it, not performing independence, but actually feeling the floor under her feet and wanting to test it alone. Cassie had stood by her rental car for a long moment before she left. "Call me," Cassie said. "I will," Olivia said. That was enough. The first night, she didn't unpack the kitchen boxes. She ate a salad from the container it came in, standing at the counter, watching the last half hour of light cross the kitchen wall. There was no particular thought attached to it. She just watched. Derek's name came up once in the first 2 weeks at the front desk when a patient's mother asked if he was still doing the Saturday repairs at the clinic's sensory garden because her son had mentioned the man with the big hands. Olivia said that arrangement had ended. The mother nodded, and that was the end of it. What reached Olivia about Derek didn't come from anyone who meant to deliver it. It came sideways. A contractor she'd treated a patient alongside, who mentioned a job site going sideways after the super got pulled from the crew rotation. A neighbor of Ray and Donna's who stopped by the clinic with her grandson and said, without knowing anything, that the Hatchers had had a hard spring. Olivia wrote it down in no place. She did not gather it. It arrived anyway, the way weather does, and it told her what she already understood. His world had gotten smaller. The table he used to sit at with certainty now had people leaving before the second drink. Invitations moved around him without landing. What he had traded an entire geography for was still in that house on a street of identical crepe myrtles, and whatever it looked like now, it was his to navigate without her geometry holding any of it together. She did not think about it often. She was busy. The clinic had a waiting list again by mid-July. 2 new patients referred by a neurologist in Frisco. 1 pro bono case she'd requested herself, a 6-year-old with a gait issue they'd caught early and clean. She restructured Tuesday afternoons to fit it. She ate lunch in 20 minutes most days and didn't stop thinking about what came next. Sophia's grandmother brought corn chips to the July session the same way she'd brought them every time, shaking the bag open before she was fully through the door. Sophia ran the lateral sequence without prompting and then looked at her grandmother before she looked at Olivia. Olivia noted that in the session file as a good sign because it was. Her mother did not call. Olivia did not call her mother. There was a Sunday in August when she drove the long route past Lorraine's house, not to see anything, not to confirm anything, just because the road was there, and the morning was flat and bright, and she had nowhere to be until noon. The rancher sat the same as it always had, same crepe myrtles, the screen door replaced and sitting clean in the frame. Derek had replaced it. She registered that and kept driving. The photograph she hung was of her and Cassie in Chicago, 12 years back, standing outside the building where Olivia had run her first practice. Cassie had her arm thrown around Olivia's shoulders, and both of them were squinting into the light. Olivia hung it in the second bedroom, the one she used for work, level with the window so she could see it from her desk. She had looked at it twice by the end of the first week, and both times felt something settle. Ray Hatcher called her once, near the end of July. She let it go to voicemail. He said he was sorry, that Donna was sorry, that they didn't expect her to do anything with that. They just wanted her to have it. She listened to the message twice, standing in the clinic parking lot after the last patient had gone. Then she locked her car and walked back inside to finish her notes for the day. There was no answer she owed him. There was no answer she had. The apartment had a window at the east end of the living room that she'd noticed but hadn't opened until August. The night air in Denton in August was still thick, but there was a half hour around 9 o'clock when something shifted and the heat relented slightly, and if the window was open, you could feel it. She opened it on a Thursday and left it open and went back to the book she was reading. The curtain moved once. She didn't look up. 8 years was not nothing. She knew that. It was a city she'd left. A practice she'd dismantled and rebuilt. A room in someone else's hometown where she'd learned the names of contractors and neighbors and the pediatric referral network from scratch. All of it had been real. None of it had been wasted in the way that word usually means. She was 34. She had a waiting list and a lease and a scratch in the hardwood floor that she still didn't mind. On a Friday in late August, she walked out of the clinic at 6 o'clock, the same time she always locked up, and the parking lot was empty except for her car and the last orange edge of the evening sitting above the building line. She stood there for a moment, keys in her hand, not stalling, not gathering herself, just standing. Then she drove home.
If you made it this far, you already know why this channel exists. See you tomorrow.